Hello everybody! The faction focus for Chaos Knights has just been released as of today, and I want to talk a little bit about it. I think it's really interesting. There's some cool stuff in here. I've got a lot of thoughts about 11th edition and how Chaos Knights might fare for it, and I thought it'd be fun to just, discuss a little bit with you guys. So I was very excited when in the last faction focus, it mentioned that Chaos Knights was going to be the next faction that was going to be released alongside Imperial Knights on Warhammer Community. Brewing over the weekend beforehand, trying to think of, what they might do. They seem to be revamping a lot of the Grotmus attachments. Now, I was curious on how they were going to do it. So I waited, read the article as soon as released, and now we're going to kind of go over my thoughts about it. So upon initial read, I was a little bit disappointed, to say the least. I thought the whole faction focus for both Imperial and Chaos Knights was a bit of a stinker. I really can't lie. On initial read through, I had hoped for more. However, I've reread through it a couple of times now. Hopefully you've had a chance to read it yourself as well, person watching this. I actually do think it is a lot better than it seems on initial read through, and I am actually quite excited for what is in it. Throughout all the other faction focuses they released, I've taken a peek at them. Nothing in them I would say has been too interesting to me personally. I'm sure there is some cool stuff in there for those of you that play other factions. Nothing coming out seems to have been super broken. They don't seem to be announcing any crazy, Blade of Ultramar 2.0 detachments in these articles. However, it was simply my own hopes that Chaos Knights was going to get something obviously cool and shiny and new, and we were going to get the broken thing. However, that doesn't seem to be the case, which on the whole is a good thing. It is a good thing that all of the faction-focused detachments seem to be of a similar power level. So we'll go through them really quickly. I'll give you my kind of thoughts and a rundown of briefly what they are. So starting us off with Bastions of Tyranny. The rule here gives +1s to hit rolls for Knight Tyrant units specifically against Battleshock targets. It's a little bit niche, but on the whole, not too terrible. The enhancement here though, I do think is quite powerful. It allows a Knight Tyrant model to reroll a random number of attacks for all of its weapons. So this goes for things like the Ectoplasmic Decimator, the Volcano Cannon, the Geistreich missile launchers, everything like that. Most of its weapons in all honesty, which is a really good thing. It makes it a lot more consistent, which is really, really nice. The stratagem they show off for this one is not terrible. It allows you to fall back and shoot with a Knight Tyrant. It is probably the easiest Knight to just tie up with a small little chaff unit. So it makes your Knight being tagged not such a big deal, which is always quite nice. So yeah, initially for this one, like with most of them, probably hoping this is just going to be a 1 detachment point detachment. The power level is not incredible. On the surface, it seemed quite underwhelming. I don't think it is honestly all that bad. As I mentioned, with Battleshocks now sticking around for longer, buffs against Battleshock unit gets a lot better. So I've seen people throwing around ideas that with this, your Knight Tyrants can get +1 to hit Battleshock units, +1 to wound them through your Dread table, as well as a lot of possible other buffs from other detachments. So it means you can really kind of buff these things to the nines. Onto Hunting Warpack, we've got a Wardog focus attachment here. The rule here allows a Wardog within 12 inches of an enemy unit to increase their detection range by 6 inches. And you are not allowed to take it with another Wardog detachment. The enhancement here is a little bit niche. It allows an Executioner unit to get Ignore's cover. Finally, the stratagem, Wardog unit, 5-up Feel No Pain in the fight phase. Not terrible, not great, however. I typically find Feel No Pains on Wardogs not all that impressive, however, it could be quite good. On the whole though, again, I'm thinking of 1 detachment point here for this one. The detachment rule is not terribly powerful, it seems. Initially, when you read it, I was quite unimpressed by it. Extra detection range is nice, however, I don't feel it's going to be all that important. However, upon reading it again, I thought this one might be quite nice if you paired this attachment with some Shooting Knights. So could either be your Knight Tyrants, your Double Gatling Despoilers, or Knight Desecrators, things like that. Allowing your Shooting Knights to shoot things within, say, terrain pieces, instead of at 15 inches, at instead 21 inches, so long as that enemy unit was within 12 inches and spotted by a Wardog, is really quite good. You don't have to expose your big knights as much. Your enemy may be in a terrain piece, but it doesn't give them as much of a benefit as it normally would. So it could be quite nice in that aspect. However, upon reading through it again, I maybe don't think that combination is so good. Running a Wardog up within 12 inches of an enemy unit usually means you're trying to kill it in melee. So running a Wardog all the way up to then shoot the enemy away with a Shooting Knight kind of leaves your Wardog sitting out in the open, is my thoughts. So kind of flipping back around again, I don't feel this attachment is all that good. However, I could be proved wrong. Finally, we get to the big one that I think a lot of people are going to be talking about, is the changes to Iconoclast Fiefdom. So as we've seen, all the Grotmus attachments are getting reworked in a way to fit into the new detachment point system and the new set of rules, and I think this is actually one of the best changes they've made so far. Iconoclast Fiefdom seems to have, funnily enough, quite a cult following. I think there is going to be some people that are quite sad that the old Iconoclast that we know and love is changing into this sort of nerfed, kind of duller version. However, I do think it is actually the strongest of the 3 detachment that they've shown off here. So I hope people aren't too sad about losing what has been and instead embrace what can now be. So what exactly have they changed? Basically, they've taken away the ability for you to sacrifice your cultist to a big knight in order to give it sustained or lethal. Instead, you can still include damned units, so that is currently cultists and accursed cultists, as well as a smattering of characters, as well as things like traitor guardsmen, and it allows your damned units to reroll their leadership rolls. You cannot exceed 500 points of damned units, which is the same as it currently stands. The enhancement they show off here allows a damned unit near the Chaos Knight Holiness enhancement to heroically intervene for 1 less CP. I don't think this is all that important. Damned units, aside from accursed cultists, typically have pretty poor melee, so I think this is going to be really, really niche. The stratagem they show off here, however, I do think is incredibly strong. So it happens in your command phase. You select 1 friendly damned unit, aside from accursed cultists, within 9 inches of a friendly Chaos Knight model. It does not specify Chaos Knight Titanic, so this can be any knight. The effect is then you select 1 Chaos Knight model within 9 inches of your unit and roll a d3 plus 3. Your damned unit then suffers that many mortal wounds, and your Chaos Knight then heals that many wounds. Healing a minimum of 4 wounds up to possibly 6 is really quite impressive. If the bracketing system continues to stay as it currently is in 10th edition, I think this stratagem is really going to be quite a big deal. Knights often, want to be hitting above half strength or above bracketed. You don't want to be taking battle shocks on your big guys. You can still use your stratagems. You don't want to be bracketed so that you can be even worse in shooting and or melee. And so this can really help get you out of that. The stratagem stating that it happens in your command phase means you can possibly heal at the start of your command phase, meaning that your knight gets to above half strength so that you do not have to take a battle shock, meaning you don't have to worry about not holding a primary that your knight might be standing on because you no longer have to take a battle shock test. You're back up to above half wounds, which is really, really nice. So although we see that the actual Iconoclast rule here has been nerfed, like I've said from its previous iteration, it is still incredibly strong. Having access to just regular cultists as a Chaos Knight army is really, really good. These little cheap trash pieces don't exist inside of Chaos Knights. All of them just come from currently allying demons into our forces, unless you are playing the current iteration of Iconoclast Fiefdom, but they are incredibly nice to have. Little throwaway things that can hold your backfield, that can go out and score area denial at the start of the game, can go away and do your sabotage, recover assets, things like that. And you don't have to worry if they die. Only a 50-point unit that dies to a stiff breeze but still can score you some points is really, really nice. Just thinking about initial list ideas, you include things like Plague Bearers, obviously usually to hold your backfield, say a Beast of Nurgle and a unit of Nurglings. That's almost up to 200 points of little things to score you points, hold your backfield, etc. You could take 30 cultists for 150 points in the current edition of Warhammer 40k, and they will similarly fill all of those roles and get you much more bodies, which increases your screening that you can do either in front of your knights from charges or in your backfield from deep strikes, which is just phenomenal. Cultists, like I say, die incredibly easily, but their utility is amazing. If they continue to stay as they are into 11th edition at 50 points a unit, and they keep their datasheet ability that Sticky's objectives is going to be really, really strong. As I said, because they have brought the power level down quite a lot, I am hoping it's going to be 1 detachment point. To me, this seems very fitting for 1 detachment point. However, like I mentioned, I do think this is incredibly strong. So I'm hoping it is not 2 detachment points, as I think that might push it out of being viable. You're paying quite a premium just to get access to cultists, and without the sustained or lethal ability that you can achieve from the detachment, I don't think is going to be worth 2 detachment points, but we'll have to see when it comes out. But as of right now, very, very hopeful about this one. So that's it for the faction focus so far. Like I say, initially seems to be a bit of a stinker, but upon reread, I am actually quite excited for what we've got here. The Tyrant detachment seems a little niche, but quite nice, especially at 1 detachment point. Iconoclast seems really good within its new iteration. Again, hopefully 1 detachment point. The War Dog one, I'm a little less sold on so far. However, again, my opinion may flip for a 4th time, so we shall see. I want to use this video to also go over some rough ideas I've kind of had for 11th so far. I don't particularly want to make a dedicated 11th edition video, considering we still have huge gaps in our knowledge as to what the new edition is going to be like. However, some speculation here and there on Chaos Knights can never go wrong. As it stands with our codex going into the new edition, we're probably looking at things like Infernal Lance being a 3 detachment point detachment, and everything else inside the codex I'm assuming is going to be 2 detachment points. I would certainly hope. I don't really see any of the other detachments having a strong enough power level to be worth 3 detachment points. You know, you think of things like Blades of Ultramar, Infernal Lance, things like Berserker Warband for World Eaters, probably all going to be 3 detachment point detachments. They have incredibly strong rules, stratagems, enhancements, etc. And everything aside from Infernal doesn't seem to have that power level to me. They all seem to have really good use cases, though they also lack in big areas, whereas things like Infernal really cover everything inside the army. So with that, the hope is that you take one of the 2 detachment points detachments from the codex and pair them with one of the 1 detachment points from the article here, and bam, that is your army. And when you start looking at things that way, it does really get me quite excited. We started to theorycraft some armies. My first thought was running the current Houndpack Lance attachment. I've been playing with that a lot recently and having quite a lot of fun with it. And you pair it with a possible Iconoclast Fiefdom in its new iteration, you really do start to get somewhere. Having a horde of cultists alongside a horde of war dogs is going to be really quite good, I think. The amount of utility your cultists can give you while screening in front of you and behind you, doing all of your actions, holding your points, etc., allowing your war dogs to go out and simply do what they do best in killing enemy units, I think can be really quite good. Healing war dogs with the Fiefdom stratagem, I think, is going to be really good as well. Having only 14 wounds means healing a war dog, you know, possibly up to 6 wounds is really quite a big deal. You know, they go from, say, being on 2 wounds left and you heal them 6 all the way back up to 8. You get them above battle shocking, they're outside of bracketed, they gain basically all of their power back for 1 CP, I think is going to really be a big benefit for them. Houndpack as well, hopefully still having access to their walk through models and walls enhancement. Things like their reactive move, their uppy downy, their fight on death really just gives you a really nice breadth of utility with the cultists and the rules of Houndpack. You can really do it all. You know, scoring becomes less of a problem, killing is still nice and easy. And it's a combination I'm really hopefully looking forward to seeing. Another one people will probably jump to thinking of is the Lords of Dread detachment plus the new Bastions detachment. Lords of Dread, you're already seeing people take Knight Tyrants anyways, and then getting Bastions alongside it, buffing your Tyrants even further, I think is going to be really good. Lords of Dread allowing your other big knights to run around, sticky objectives, hopefully put on some melee pressure if you take any Rampagers, and then you take Bastions. Even if you just put 1 Tyrant inside of it, you're going to have an incredibly strong shooting platform. It's going to blow up any of the enemy's anti-tank that it even thinks about. All the enhancements inside of Lords of Dread hopefully will remain really, really strong as they currently are. It's probably what I would say is the best thing about the detachment at the moment is the enhancements. So if they stay unchanged, obviously it could be a really nice pairing for Bastions. Again, quite niche, possibly a bit of a SKU list or a teams list you might build that for. You know, I wouldn't really recommend, say, 3 Knight Tyrants for a singles event. But, you know, in the current meta, if that continues to exist in 11th edition, 3 Knight Tyrants with +1 to hit, +1 to wound, plus whatever other kind of buffs you can give them into, say, Catan, or other hull spams like Imperial Guard versus other Knight armies, is seemingly going to be really, really good. Finally, I think there might be quite an interesting combination between the new Hellhunt Lance attachment and the new Bastions attachment. Hellhunt, when it was released, I was thoroughly underwhelmed by. When I had read an article ages ago that Chaos Knights were going to be getting a new detachment with the Eye of Terror books, I was over the moon. I was really, really hopeful we were going to get something really cool for the end of the edition, something really fun. And Hellhunt came out, and I was initially quite excited about it. However, having seen it and played around with it a little bit, it's relatively underwhelming to me. It's not something that particularly interests me. However, I think this new article might have breathed some new life back into it. I think a combination of Hellhunt and the Bastions attachment could be really, really fun. Hellhunt does about only one thing really well, and that's force lots of battle shocks with the Abominant enhancement that you can take. This enhancement allows all of your war dogs near an Abominant to force battle shocks on enemy units that they shoot. The Abominant as well obviously forces a battle shock currently on an enemy unit that is visible to it within 24 inches. And with Battle Shocks now sticking around for a lot longer, forcing them outside of your opponent's turn is going to be really, really powerful. Moving on though, I think the terrain changes that we've seen so far seem really, really good for the game. I think there's a really interesting dynamic now where, with the objectives being the terrain pieces, it's not so easy to shove a Big Knight and its 10 OC on top of an objective and telling your opponent, hey, come do something about this. Now being in a terrain piece means you have to toe into the terrain piece with a large knight, meaning you can shoot out. Obviously, yes, great. However, still means you can be shot. So it becomes a really interesting dichotomy of, do I put my Big Knight on this objective and get 10 extra OC on there, possibly hold it into my turn whilst risking my Big Knight? Or do I keep him behind the terrain piece? I keep him safe for another turn, another round of shooting possibly. However, I risk my opponent simply walking one or two guys onto this objective, and then I won't hold it at all. I think this kind of stuff is really, really good for the game. Forcing more decisions is almost always a good thing. I think it's a really interesting decision to make. There is no clear right or wrong answer as of just now. Again, all this is theory. We haven't yet to put the terrain on the table, play real games with it. But again, just thinking about it, it does make me really hopeful that there's going to be more of these really interesting choices to make. One thing I am really hopeful for with 11th edition is the combination of the new hidden rule and the new terrain layouts hopefully sees us moving away from the triple Gatling despoiler meta that we've been seeing for the last while. We've existed in a meta where triple Gatling despoilers inside of Infernal Lance alongside 3 or 4 War Dogs and a smattering of demons has just been meta for pretty much since the Chaos Knight Codex launched. You can't really go wrong with, 108 shots, sustained or lethal for whatever you need. It's really quite good into almost anything. They do seem to be more of a team's army these days. It is obviously incredibly bad into Catan, which I've been running around for the past couple of months now, which despoilers just hate to see coming. Even with sustained or lethal, there's simply not enough damage to kill Catan with despoilers. So although they've been forced out of the meta a little bit because of Catan, I would like to see the archetype almost gone entirely with the combination of hidden and terrain. Obviously, hidden making it a lot harder to shoot people off the board with an insane amount of firepower, and the terrain overall a little bit denser than we're normally used to, as well as a little bit closer to each other. Staging areas seem to be a lot further up, and so putting a Gatling Despoiler up is now a lot more of a risk. It's no longer sit at the back of the board and shoot you to death with my 1 billion shots, and aren't we all just having so much fun? I am a little worried that, however, moving away from Gatling Despoilers could see us move back towards a War Dog spam kind of meta. If you aren't able to shoot your opponents to death, if we are a lot closer together, if there is more staging closer to one another, it might be that we move back towards 14 War Dogs and just have as many bodies as possible hiding all inside of our war zone, which I'm sure everyone who doesn't play them is incredibly excited to hear about. Who doesn't love War Dog spam? But nevertheless, I think that remains to be seen. Obviously, the meta is a thing that is incredibly hard to predict if you are not, one of the top players of the game. However, even for a new edition, I think they would struggle to predict what the meta is going to be. So we'll simply just have to wait and see for this one. As mentioned before, with Battle Shock now staying onto units into their next turn, even if they are not below half strength, is really, really big. I've generally been alright with the Battle Shock rules of 10th edition. I know they've been quite contentious. Battle Shock seems to be a very feast or famine thing at the moment, of it either does everything at an exact critical moment and stops your opponent from scoring 5 points, 10 points, and allows you to score more than them, or it does absolutely nothing. It doesn't matter. A single scout gets battle shocked and stands in the corner and never does anything for the rest of the game. However, I never really had a problem with all this. A thing this does mean though is that forcing battle shocks now is really, really good. Off of the dread table, obviously you can force battle shocks to enemy units that are below starting strength. The Abominant forces battle shocks again on enemy units that are visible to it, as well as a smattering of other ways to do it through enhancements and stratagems and the such in the various detachments. It's always been something that has been relatively good. Usually you battle shock a unit before you go into melee or shooting with it to stop them from doing things like, say, Armor of Contempt or Heroic Intervention or such. However, with it now staying into your opponent's command phase and then having to retake a test to unbattle shock, makes our ability to force battle shocks within our own turn really, really quite good. It's no longer, haha, you can no longer use Armor of Contempt. It's now, haha, you have to take a test to see if you still even hold that objective. I think on the whole, as a lot of people will be able to see, this is inherently a very big buff for Chaos Knights as a whole. I have never been huge on the whole Chaos Knights revolving around Battleshock. However, if this is the direction they're going to continue taking us in, I do think this is a really good change for us. I know it wasn't made for us in particular, as much as I would like to believe that, but it inadvertently buffs us, I do think. I think this also brings a really big amount of stocks to the Abominant, which I already was quite a big fan of, but I know had fallen out of favor with a lot of people. It is an incredibly beautiful model, and to be able to say, yes, I'm taking an Abominant because its rules are now relatively good, it warms my heart. You know, the idea of taking double or triple Abominants inside of Praetorus Lance, as well as, say, a 1 detachment point detachment, whatever that may be, and forcing Battleshocks everywhere, and doing mortal wounds when you step near people, and doing all this, and they're -1 to hit, and we're +1 to wound them, and everything just absolutely warms my heart. Again, possibly wishful thinking, but Abominant stocks are way up, and my god, I'm riding it to the moon, baby. So lastly, there's a bit of wish listing for kind of 11th edition. I would like to see some overall kind of tweaks and changes to a few of the things regarding Chaos Knights in particular. I would like to see a small change to Super Heavy Walker. I've kind of not loved how it's been the whole edition. I think it's incredibly beneficial to us as Knight players. It feels almost impossible to play the game without a rule like Super Heavy Walker, moving through terrain and models. However, it doesn't always feel like the most impactful detriment, being where if you roll a d6 and on a 1 when you walk through a wall, you are then just battle shocked. I've always felt it should be a more consistent rule, rather than 1 in 6 times you get battle shocked, which often ends up being quite a big deal. You know, you walk your big knight out, you often want to do something good with it, whether that be shooting an enemy to death or charging them. Often these things will require the support of a stratagem, and so being battle shocked does matter quite a lot. However, only mattering kind of 1 in 6 times, but when it does matter, it is horrifically impactful for you. Hasn't always been kind of the best design choice for me. I believe I was watching the video by Astra with Shagrot and 40k by Night, but I believe it was in that episode where it was brought up the idea of Chaos Knights simply taking things like mortal wounds when they walk through walls, or perhaps D3 mortals, or just something a bit more interesting to the Super Heavy Walker rule, something that is more consistent, however perhaps not as detrimental as you are just now battle shocked. I do think this would be a really good change. You can now plan your turns a lot better. You go, yes, I will walk through that wall. However, sure, I'll take D3 mortal wounds, but I know I'm going to take the mortal wounds. It could be a case that if my knight is on 2 wounds, perhaps I don't walk him through the wall. Or perhaps my knight is sitting just above bracketing. Perhaps again, I don't walk him through the wall. I don't want him to be bracketed. I think making the punishment more consistent, like I say, you're able to plan your turn a lot better. It feels a lot more interactive. It feels like a real choice rather than randomly, oh, I'm battle shocked and now I can't do the thing I wanted to do. It's a little bit of a feels bad, and I just think a bit more consistency could help a lot with that. Another change I would like to see inside of the game is generally to despoilers as a whole. Like I've mentioned, the meta has pretty much been dominated by triple Gatling cannon despoilers since the codex has come out for Chaos Knights, which on the whole, I can't blame people for playing. It's been incredibly strong. For so long, GW have kind of refused to do anything about it. And so, you know, how can you really fault people for playing it? However, it is simply just not the kind of Chaos Knights that I enjoy to play. I think Chaos Knights to me have never really felt like a mass shooting army, and that's kind of what this has turned them into. You know, it's a very uninteractive play style. You know, you have this big stat check thing that can blow you off the board from 36 inches away with very minimal risk, unless you happen to be playing an army like Tau that can blow them up in return. Has just felt a bit of a feels bad for opponents. And I think as a whole, the despoiler profile has just been a little bit uninteresting. It shoots, and that's about all it does. Its datasheet abilities aren't that interesting. One of them makes it shoot better. One of them is almost entirely useless. You never really see people talk about it or it come up inside of games. It is entirely just taken as a gun platform, which I think is really depressing. And I think is a little bit of a wider problem I have with Chaos Knights as a whole. It's just the aura abilities in general, or the interaction between big knights and small knights. I get a little jealous, you know, maybe the grass is greener on the other side, but looking at Imperial Knights and the way their big knights interact with their small knights is really quite depressing as a Chaos Knights player. I think Bondsman is such a cool, unique, and interesting ability. And the fact we don't have something like that is quite depressing. I don't think it has to be identical. I don't want it to be identical. I want to have kind of cool, unique interactions between our units. It just, however, feels the data sheets for some of the Chaos Knights could be changed a little bit. For the Despoiler as well, I would like to see it almost changed to where you can't have two of the same weapon. I would like to either see some kind of penalty or some kind of buff when either you take two of the same weapon, obviously penalty, or two different weapons that you would possibly never take together, but you gain some kind of benefit for it, you know? I know this is kind of dipping its toes back into the whole war gear argument. I know back in the day, we used to have to pay a premium to take, say, the two Gatling cannons on the Despoiler, which is maybe a discussion for another day. I just think they could do something a bit more interesting with the Despoiler. I want to be excited to take my Despoiler for something that can output so much damage. It's quite a boring unit, you know. Perhaps it's a case of I wish I could have my cake and eat it too, but I would like my knight to shoot well and also still do cool stuff, you know. However, though, I'm not going to sit here and ramble on forever about how I think Chaos Knights should be the best faction in the world and we should change it and GW should make me their specialist little boy, because I could talk about it forever. So I think we'll just leave that there. Hopefully this was overall relatively interesting. If you have any similar thoughts or contradicting thoughts to me, leave them down in the comments below. I always like talking Chaos Knights with people. Again, as mentioned, I could talk Chaos Knights forever, so if you have any ideas what you would like for the new edition, or like I say, if you have any issues with any of the points I've made, please leave them down below. I'd love to read it. I'll hopefully get back to you. But yeah, that is going to be everything for now, until there's more Chaos Knight news to talk about. So that's it. Thank you for listening, and I will see you all later.